Hello and welcome back to, I guess, a part 2 to my What I Wish I Knew About SCAD video. I've actually gotten quite a bit of questions from that video, and one of the main ones that I've gotten is about off-campus housing. So, as I said, I could make an entire video on that, so here we are, making a video about it, obviously. Jessica's wandering around. So SCAD off-campus housing isn't as easy as you would think it would be, just because Savannah's rental market is a little bit different, so I kind of jotted down some notes. Okay, so the first thing that you should know is that you're going to need to set a budget, obviously. Rule number 1 of trying to find an apartment. So SCAD's off-campus housing policy, when I was in school, it's probably the same since I graduated not too long ago, is that you will lose 30% of your scholarships. So that's all of your scholarships separately. You'll be losing 30% of each. But you're also not paying for your meal plan. So when I did the math, I lived in Turner House. I know it depended on what dorm you lived in as to how much your housing was. So it might be different with the new dorms or with the new cost of SCAD. I don't know what it costs anymore. But at that time, it was still cheaper for me to live off campus than to live on campus. Also, the upperclassmen dorms just aren't that great. I know the freshmen have new dorms now that are really nice and have a little kitchenette. And I know that the off-campus housing for upperclassmen, some of them do have kitchens, but they're just not the best. So that was the main reason why I wanted to move, was because I just wanted a kitchen. So most loans that you get do have like a cost of living added to them, and that's typically what you'll get for your refund check from SCAD that pays for like your books, your supplies, just whatever it is that you need throughout the quarter. So that is what I used as my budget for the quarter. So one thing to keep in mind when you're doing this is that you do have that 6-week break for winter. So during that time, just to cover the cost of your rent and everything, and then summer, again, you're gonna have to budget for that. Or you could just get a part-time job, and that makes things a lot easier. All right, so one of the second things that I learned is that you should lower your standards. You're most likely gonna need a roommate. I mean, you're in college, so that's not anything new. So just expect that you're gonna have a roommate, find some friends to get a house with. My first year I moved off campus, I had 2 other roommates, and then the next quarter maybe I had 3 other roommates, and then I moved again, I had 2 roommates, I moved again my senior year, and I had 1 roommate. So it just depends on the size of the house that you get, obviously, as how many roommates you have. And the more roommates, the lower the cost, obviously, because most 3 to 4 bedroom houses still tend to be within the same price range. So you might as well just get like 3 other roommates and split the cost, and it can be really, really cheap. And it's not uncommon that you'll have SCAD students living with like 3 to even 5 other people. So most of the rentals are going to be through private landlords, and a lot of them are in duplexes. So that'll be like an old house that's split up into 2 apartments. One's on the first floor and one's on the second floor. So most of mine, I was on the ground floor, which I found was easier for moving in, but typically the second floor tends to be a little more secure, even though I never had an issue with security. It's just something to keep in mind. There's not really any apartment complexes. I kind of addressed this in my last video, that there is the Hue and the Blake, and I know that there are some other ones, but they tend to be more expensive, so they're going to be a little outside of your typical budget. And another thing is that I just found it just wasn't really worth the cost. Most of my friends that did live there had maintenance issues. The maintenance team didn't really fix anything. They had issues with the management not really being connected with them or communicating with them about things, and they just weren't like super happy about it. It wasn't too different from living in a dorm, so I just don't think it's worth the cost. So a lot of off-campus housing will be through private landlords. So another thing to keep in mind is that the houses are all pretty old. It's Savannah, it's an old city, and they are gorgeous, but they will have I put in quotations, they'll have plenty of character. So I did live in gorgeous apartments because of how old they were. They have the original hardwood floors, the original fireplaces. They just have a lot of character if they haven't been too heavily renovated. But this is some of the main issues that I ran into with having an older house, which is pretty typical. Most of them had pretty bad heating and air conditioning, which can lead to really high utility costs. I know that the power company has been sold to a new owner, so the utility costs are a little lower now than they were when I was in school, but you're still looking at like $100 minimum, and then in the summer they will jack up the prices of air conditioning. So the lowest bill that I had was down to like $30, which is typically in the winter because we didn't need air conditioning really. But we did have a bill in a house that had terrible air conditioning, and we had it on constantly, and it was still 85 degrees in the house, and that bill ended up being $300, which luckily it was split up between 3 roommates. No, we had 4 roommates at the time, but oh my goodness, that was awful. And a lot of the windows don't open too, which is strange. A lot of the landlords just tended to seal them shut to try to have better insulation on the housing, because a lot of the older houses don't have insulation at all, or they're just painted shut from over time, so that's something to look at if you just really want your windows to open. And although it does have, most of the houses will have a fireplace, they're typically going to be boarded up just to meet code. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind once you've lowered your standards is you have to know where to look. So the best places to look are actually Trulia, Zillow. They both have an app. Facebook, I know there's plenty of Facebook pages for people looking for roommates and for off-campus housing. Craigslist, and then just word of mouth from other students that are moving out, or if you know someone that has a landlord, get in touch with that landlord to see if they have any other properties, because most landlords tend to have 2 to 4 other properties that they're looking at. So one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at these houses is to be aware of scams. I've ran into this a couple of times when contacting someone off of Craigslist. So the typical layout of these scams is that it's going to have a low cost in rent, like really low for what the house looks like. They're typically going to rip the photos of a house from a listing that's currently available, and they're not going to list the exact address or send you the exact address. So you'll get an email once you respond to these people, and they'll say that they need someone to move in soon, or they're flexible with move in and move out. They're flexible with rent. I've had people say that you can pick your own flooring because they said that the house isn't complete yet, so I can help pick out flooring and paint, which is weird. And typically they'll say that like they had somebody to rent it and it just didn't work out, so they're looking for someone right away, or they're a family going on a mission trip, so they're going to be gone for a while, and they're going to say that they don't want to disclose the exact address of the house until after we run a credit check. Obviously, don't fall for that. And so they won't give you the actual address. So don't give these people your credit card information. Don't reply to them. Just don't do anything. Just leave it alone. Don't email them. And one thing that I found is if they do provide an address, be sure to look up the exact address, because sometimes they'll just list an address of a house that isn't even there, and it'll include pictures of a listing that's in the area. I actually only had one landlord ask me for a credit check, and that was after I looked at the apartment and met the landlord. Always go with a friend so you don't get murdered. Or if you can't make it yourself, have a friend and somebody else look at the apartment for you, because obviously you're going to want to see it in person before you do anything. And one of the biggest things that was pretty stressful when looking for a place is that the houses will not be available until a month before your lease begins. So if you're looking for a place for the fall and you want to move in September or August, that house is not going to be on the market until the month before, so that would be July or August. I did happen to find some landlords that were a little more flexible with this and allowed me to rent like a month earlier, move in a month earlier, but it was really difficult to find somebody like that, and typically you're going to have to pay the deposit in the first month's rent more upfront. So you're not going to be able to look in April and find a place for September. Okay, next on my list, be sure that the people that you're looking for a house with are responsible people. A lot of times when you're friends with them, it's really different than being a roommate. One thing that I found out through personal experience, that it's good to get all of your roommates on the lease. Most landlords will require that anyways. And I found that it's great just to draft up a roommate agreement. So it's not necessarily through the lease, but it's through you as roommates, because once you move in with somebody, it's pretty different than actually being friends with them, and some issues may come up that a roommate agreement addresses. And you might think, oh, this is my best friend, we get along so well, we won't need it. Well, something's gonna come up and you're gonna need it. Another thing that I found is helpful is to split up the bills in each other's names. So like I would be in charge of power, another roommate would be in charge of water, and another would be in charge of internet and cable. So this is just mainly in case like the one person that has everything in their name moves out of the house, then you'll have to do like a lot of reorganizing, changing it into somebody else's name. Typically you'll have to pay if you want to move a bill into somebody else's name rather than just changing the address. So it's a lot easier just to split those up. And it's also easier on you because you're not trying to take care of everything all at once, which can get a little stressful. So with that, you're going to need to get your roommate's Venmo information. Either Venmo or Cash App is what I use with my roommates, and it just like helps you keep in contact, keep up to date on bills. It's easy, it's fast, and you're not like writing checks left and right. Some landlords will even take Venmo too, so make sure you ask them that. And another thing is get their parents' information. Maybe I'll say this in another video because boy do I have some stories. But there were times where I almost did need to contact the roommate's parent just because they weren't being responsible enough or contacting me when I really needed to get into contact with them. So that's all I'm gonna say in this video. So obviously one of the most important things to keep in mind is location, location, location. We've all seen HGTV. We know it's important. Within Savannah, you know, it's like a grid system. And within this whole grid of Savannah, there's a little area that people actually want to live in. So in that area, obviously, the closer to Broughton Street, Bull Street, and Forsyth Park, the better. Also, the closer to Kroger, the better, because you're going to be going to Kroger like every other day, and I found that it's just easier to live nearby. I would call like the safe square no further back than 39th Street. I actually lived on 39th Street, so I knew what the area looked like behind 39th Street. And although it looks nice when you go to visit, like they have the bakery and there's like a thrift store and Starlandia is out there, it's not the safest area to be. And also you're closer to the train tracks, which can get pretty loud. I would not go the streets to the left and the right. I would not go up past Barnard and then past Price Street. So if you're familiar with Savannah, you know what that means. It's like they're in this side, 39th Street is up here, and like the river is here. So just try to stay in those areas. I found that they tend to be the safer places. And I would avoid 37th Street. I lived on 37th Street and it was a gorgeous house, but the street was just really loud. And there actually tended to be a lot of accidents that I had to call 911 for because they were right outside of my house. I'm also going to tell you about the house on 37th Street. I rented through Creative Living Concepts. Remember that name, Creative Living Concepts. Don't rent for them. Don't rent from them. It was a terrible experience, which I could turn into another video. The last point that I wanted to touch on is make sure there's good parking. A lot of the houses will not have a parking garage or a parking lot. I only had one place that did, and then Frogtown had like a designated parking area, but my roommate and I agreed that she got the parking space and I got the bathtub. So a lot of times I had to rely on off-street parking. So if you're already in Savannah and have a car, you know that the number one rule is to read the street signs. Some of them will only have hourly parking. Some of them will be metered parking if you don't have like a residency sticker. And some of them will have the freaking street sweepers. I got like 4 tickets from the street sweepers. If you go over to somebody's house, or if you go to a party or something, as soon as you hear the street sweeper, I guarantee you at least 10 people will run outside to move their car because they did not read the street sign. Don't pay $50 for a parking ticket if you can avoid it. Alright, so that wraps up my off-campus housing video. Hopefully the sun didn't set too much, and hopefully I got everything. The bell's interrupting me. I'm gonna try to wrap this up because I'm hungry and I want Mexican food. Okay, so I guess it's quiet enough now. If you like this video, if you want me to do another video about what I wish I knew, whether it be about SCAD, DC, being a millennial, getting a job, I don't know, whatever it is about life you want me to talk about, I'll do it. So obviously, give this video a thumbs up. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments down below. I'll have a link to my first SCAD video that I did. Subscribe. Eska, can you say subscribe? We're working on it.